Hi, Michael. Hi, everybody. Super excited to be here. My name's Andrew Lau. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Jellyfish here in Boston. We're trying to provide visibility to large software engineering teams like the way that Salesforce did for sales 15 years ago.
Great. How about you, Ashley?
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name's Ashley Ladd. I'm a manager on our diversity, inclusion, and belonging team at HubSpot. And I also sit on the board of trustees of my alma mater, St. Lawrence University.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, Ashley.
Thank you.
And Kirk, last but not least.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so delighted to be here with this tremendous set of compadres on the panel. And this great event. I'm a 40-year-plus veteran of the Boston tech community, so there, loud and proud. Three-time CEO, I founded a company, and now I'm in the portfolio part of my career. So I'm an executive in residence. I teach at MIT Sloan, and I do a lot of board work. I'm on 3 public boards, a SPAC board, which is really interesting, and some private boards. So I'm having a wonderful second career.
And thank you also for being a very active part of the board core and the core community, which a number of you have participated in. It's been great to have you. Excellent. Well, with that as an intro, I'm going to jump right in, and I want you guys to have the dialogue that works for you. So why is culture important, and what does it mean for you in your organizations? And Ashley, how about we start with you on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So culture is just integral to everything that we do at HubSpot. Dharmesh spoke yesterday about kind of how culture started from day one at HubSpot. It was really something that our founders felt like the investment was going to be worth the long term on this. So as we scale as a company, it was about our people, and it was about how we wanted to grow as not only as an organization and for our customers and partners, but also for our employees. And so our culture has really become and has really worked to be this really authentic, really strong place where I think everyone doesn't really associate it with, a certain location or a certain office building, but really kind of the way in which we work together. So Dharmesh talked, a little bit about heart and how we think about, being humble and empathetic, adaptable, remarkable, and transparent. And those are the things that really kind of ground us to our work every single day. So it's an important and very integral part of everything we do, from our candidate experience all the way through our employees' HubSpot journey.
Yeah, there were 2 things that stood out for me, which I'm going to ask Andrew and Kirk to comment on. One is he was very reluctant to get into defining culture, as you heard. And most CTOs, by the way, would never go near it at all. But of course, the fact that he did is a great strength, and he was really honest and authentic about that, which I think was great. But he also said, man, now that he's done it, he wished he'd started it earlier. It was one of the 2 things he said, if only I could have started that earlier. So on the earlier point, Andrew, where are you in your journey, and where is culture fitting, and is it important for you to be defining it now?
Yeah, Michael, I think that's a great question. We've grown so much, and I mean, this year has been, it's been terrible for the world in so many ways. We've been, and I say this with modesty, we've been very lucky to be activated and accelerated in that. And we've grown from, I think, 20 people to 60 just even in this kind of pandemic timeframe. And so it's in these moments that I think culture is dramatically important. I mean, more than half the team has not met each other face to face in person in all of these things. In my experience, I think culture is probably the only thread that actually keeps everyone together as you kind of go through these moments of growth. And let's be frank, like startups, you have 49% of the days are bad and 51 are better, and all of a sudden you're a winner, right? And everybody likes to tell the story post facto that it was all up and to the right. And we all know startups go like this. It's part of the journey. And I actually think that in your challenging moments, that's what keeps the team together, is culture. And I think you need to be investing in it at all times, because you have to prepare for the challenging moments. And that's the reason why people come to work and all those things. So I think it's really important for all of us to be investing in that at all times, but especially in times of high growth and tumult on things.
Now, Andrew, I know, because you do such a good job of it, that you personally lead by example in some of these things. So is there an example where you can say, wow, you were in a really tough moment and you did something that you felt was exactly what you want as a defining moment for your culture? and to be something enduring that would help people grab onto?
Yeah, I think the vernacular I sometimes use there is culture is defined by these events, these CDEs, these culture defining events. I actually think it's really important that for us, for our team and our culture, that it's the choices we make, but it's also who does them, right? And so one of the core tenets for me is actually that culture is built from the teams. And so like there are many occasions where at our size, I could run the event and I could rally the troops, but it's not about me, right? I think it's about new members of the team. And I remember a year ago, a new woman joined her team after, a few years in grad school. And it was really about her driving the initial events that brought the team together. That actually kind of, whether it was something like, hot wings tasting, or in our case, or whatever it might be, that it's, it very well could have been just mandated by the company, but that doesn't make sense. That's not genuine. That's not about developing future leadership and culture on the team. And so it's really about pushing members of the team to step up and do those things. And I think it's those little decisions that actually define how you actually act around things.
Yeah, great example. And so hot wings tastings is now in the culture code. I can hear that. But what I also love is I know you obviously rewarded it. And I think it's what you reward and what you bring forward that also makes a big difference. And in that vein, Kirk, what's been an example for you? Because you see this and have seen it. By the way, we're both in the 40-year veterans camp, so we can kind of put that one aside. But that's a value in that, because you've seen how things do or don't change in defining culture. So what might be some examples you'd like to share with people of the practical reality of this?
Yeah, and I just underscore a couple of the comments from my brilliant colleagues here. Being intentional about creating culture is so important. And part of it is because culture will form. It'll form whether you intend it to or not, right? So it's really the norms and behaviors of the company. And I think that's why it's so essential. And as you start to scale, I think it's particularly important. I was very struck by Stefania's comments on the main tent about her kind of culture defining event. We've all experienced it in COVID, right? How the teams react, to Andrew's point, how he reacted. I think, a billion years ago, Michael, we had an experience when the internet bubble burst, and I was running a company that I had founded. And suddenly we saw our pipeline go from, just this robust high growth pipeline in this young company to nothing, as our financial markets kind of retreated from technology investment in startups and in the year 2000, 2001, 2002. And so it was a preview of things to come. And that moment of truth that Stefania talked about, making decisions to lay off, I lived through. I had a huge flashback as I was listening to it, because there are ways to have those moments. When she had to do the layoff, I think they did an amazing job of being transparent and engaged. When your instinct is to hide in your office, well, you have to bring this bad news to your employees, right? So I think living your culture every day in these moments of truth is critical. And as you scale, you're going to have lots of them, right? As you start to go up that chain, Andrew talked about growing. Certainly HubSpot is the definition of a robust scaling business. And I will say that I remember when I worked for the largest company I've ever worked for, which was IBM, as a young professional, the culture was constantly reinforced. One of the tenets of the culture was customer focus. And I would sit there and watch the recognition events and company meetings where they would bring up their salespeople. I was a salesperson, who were the outstanding salesperson and who were customer centered and customer focused. They brought the culture to life in one dimension by recognizing people who really stood for it. And I sat there, I'll never forget it. I still remember it so many years later, thinking to myself, that's who I want to be, because that's who's valued and respected, and that's the behavior I want to mimic. So those recognition moments on the upside, there's downsides and struggles as we have defining moments, but there are tools like recognition, as you say, Michael, that can really reinforce on the upside. These are the norms and behaviors that we really value, and it's game changing, particularly for young people as they join cultures and are trying to figure out what's up and what's down.
Yeah, very well said. And by the way, I liked a couple of things that we're acknowledging here, which is each of you is talking about the reality, which is if you don't define culture, it will define you, because people will run with it, whatever they think is their version of what they're seeing. The second thing I think is really interesting is I listened to you, Kirk. You know, it does scale and can for companies like IBM. I've had a similar experience when my first young company, when I was a teen, became a partner with HP, and HP was huge at the time. This was when they were a computer company. And you'd go anywhere in the world to HP's offices. It didn't matter whether it was Lausanne or it was to Colorado or San Diego, it didn't matter where. HP's way, and it was literally called the HP way, was very well understood. And it had things which at the time, 30, 40 years ago, seemed absolute breakthroughs, like, you know, management by wandering around. But it was understood, and you saw it in practice, which is great. So that gives me an opportunity to turn back to you, Ashley. You know, it's easy for us to be lauding the HubSpot culture and the HubSpot way and be referring to the 140-page deck. But I know it took work to get there. And now, of course, it takes work, I'm sure, to sustain it. What is that like day to day? And how do you have to kind of help the culture? And what do you do at the scale you're at to make sure that it doesn't drift?
Absolutely. Yeah. We invest in it, Michael. And I think that's something that we've had the privilege to be able to do at this point and at scale. But I think we don't shy away from the fact that we are people on people teams, helping our people grow better. And so what we want to do and what we want to be really clear about is that there are things that we know we can do, but I think what's become really important is the omissions side of things. The things that we can't promise, the things that because culture has become this like commodity, and it's become this really important facet to the job market, right? A lot of people that are entering the job market are like, what is the culture like, right? What do you stand for as a company? What are your values? And so for us as employees to this company, but also helping to shape it, it's so important to be able to say, here are the things that we really stand for and we value and that we know are going to scale over time. And here are the things that we're not going to invest in right now. Here are the things that we can't promise you, because there is this vicious cycle, right? If you see another large company saying, "Oh, we're doing this thing and this event and this product, and we're rolling out this initiative," everyone wants to try and keep up, and it becomes this game. But if you're not listening to your employees and what they need and what they want, what's the point, right? At the end of the day. So something that I think has been really clear for us through COVID, and especially through our really high growth phase right now, is that people are tired. And we've heard this for a while. And so our leadership team came together and said, how do we work through this? We've incorporated new mental health benefits with Modern Health and a couple of other really great vendors. But how do we do this and really show our employees that this is something that's resonating with us? And so we introduced HubSpot Unplugged, which is going to be a week off for all of our HubSpot employees. We're doing it in July, and it's going to be something that continues. We know this is something that isn't going to just be a one moment in time thing, but we heard the feedback loud and clear, and we said, how do we sit together? How do we make this a priority? How do we ensure that people know that we're taking this seriously and that we know that it's been a year and it's been a difficult one for so many. So it's really being able to take those moments of feedback and really adapt and understand what are the things that our employees need now that we can invest in that's really going to help us benefit long term.
I want to acknowledge this because it's easy to just gloss over it. But what you're really saying underneath this is that you are a listening culture, and that you are, as Andrew said earlier, giving the employees a voice and giving everybody a chance to speak to what's really important to them. And sometimes that's stuff you've never predicted. I mean, none of us predicted the last year, obviously. And so kudos to you, because you didn't just take the next great, shiny object and follow it. You decided, okay, well, this is a bit of a basic thing here. It's almost like listening to Dries. Some of the things that you have to do are really boring and dull, but they're really important, like giving people time and a break to think. So really great example. Thank you for sharing that. I want to turn to actually, again, something that will play off, what people think culture is. And it's fun because I heard, I've heard a lot of people give different definitions of it, but I've always said in the talks I'm trying to sort of draw out people, what is the thing that actually enables you to do your job every day that you don't have to be told? And in good companies, that's culture. So you know what you're trying to do, that's your value prop. You may have a vision about where you want to go. Who's going to do it? It's the people, but how do you do it? You can't tell the entire group, here's how you do it, because everybody has different roles. But a culture can enable that. And I loved, my definition is it's an operating system for your company. And I think basically what you heard from Dharmesh yesterday was very similar. So Andrew, for all the things that you do, what's an example of where you think your culture is enabling how people do things?
Yeah, I think I want to double down on what you're saying here. I think, as you grow, the instinct is to just put more processes in place, and no offense to the old adage of the IBM style processes, but like I think we'd like to avoid being this overly draconian CatP process, and one of the ways you avoid it is making sure that people think like you when you're not there, so that you don't have to write down all the rules, and so that people are given freedom to innovate across that. Simple ones for us are, and this is really actually born out of the pandemic crisis, right? So we sat there in April when I think no one knew what was going to happen in the world, right? We ended up finding acceleration, but if you think back to March and April, I think all of us were sitting there being like, I don't know if we're going to walk into nuclear winter here, or if we're going to walk into what. And so we shifted our all meetings to making sure that we meet weekly, every week, to make sure we get together and talk about stuff. And we went as far as, and we've continued this to date, which is we share finances every month. We actually talk, we go through our board slides as soon as we actually have a board meeting. Part of this is that we want to teach the team like the ecosystem that we live in, the challenges that we face, the reality. We talk about our cash balances, we talk about our burn monthly, we talk about the trade-off as it actually bears into, future metrics for investors and stuff like that. And it has two reasons. Like, one, to your point, which is like really about getting people to understand and make smart decisions when it comes to investment areas, how, urgency in different things, like what drives, a change in strategy before we even have to say it. They can start seeing it themselves. And the second reason, which we haven't brought up at all, is, one of our tenets is actually really trying to invest in people to grow themselves. I hope that 15 years from now, that the team we have here is off building amazing, crazy companies in Boston and the world in ways that I haven't seen and can even imagine. In order to do that, I think we want to actually give them the visibility now so they can start internalizing these things, so they can be better operators today. They can innovate the company, but it builds a foundation for them to do amazing things, down the way. So I know that wasn't what you asked, but I think they're linked together for us.
Actually, I thought it was, very authentic and very good example of how you approach this. And by the way, it's so funny. I'm seeing a comment in the chat here, which is Doug May saying, yet a little process can set you free. This is an example of where culture is not one thing. It is, people sometimes feel like process is incredibly important. I'm personally a fan of just enough process, and no more than you need, because it can get in the way. But I do love the fact that many cultures actually shy away from it and try to put values as kind of the key thing that can guard people from, getting into trouble, or more importantly, empower people to actually go and do things like you suggested, Andrew, to innovate. And yet, Kirk, when you scale, as you know, and you become a public company, you do live within rules. I mean, you have to work within, what is corporate governance. How does that work? And what's it like being on a public company board and having to deal with this?
Well, and just to make it even more sort of underscored how critical this question is, I chair the risk committee, which is sort of the king process, right? We look for, making sure that our company has sufficient process to protect the shareholders and customers and employees. So it is a careful and delicate balance. And I think you have to separate as you scale the processes that absolutely need to evolve and change and maybe become more rigorous, and those that you can let be more organic. So just as an example, I don't know how many of you follow the GitLab business. GitLab is a West Coast based company led by a great team out there. And that business has been built up 100% remote since prior to COVID. So there's no offices, even the board meetings are not in person. And it was true prior to this becoming our normal. And what they decided to do was make transparency kind of the offset of no one having contact. I mean, literally their employees are all over the world. So you can pretty much get any data about this company anywhere inside and outside the company. But the leadership decided there was going to be some data that they were going to hold close because they knew they were going to go public. So they made a decision to keep the financial data right from the get-go to not available to the full company. Everything else is fair game. So personnel reviews, all kinds of data. So I think the more you can sort of think about as you scale, what are the things we know we have to manage differently? And sometimes financial data, anticipating you're going to be a public company, is a very sensitive data set, and you're going to need processes to control and regulate that. But other things will represent your culture and hold true to your culture and can be much more wide open. And there you focus on not the how you do it in terms of the steps, but what values in our culture do you bring to that decision? So an example in a public company we just had in our one of our committee discussions is if you think someone is misusing the data of the company in a way that's violating someone's processes, you know, what does that employee do? Do we lay out strict regulations? Do we sort of put a list of 400,000 things? And the answer is no. We're going to train our employees to have, here's how you think about it. Here's the judgment you use around data privacy, ensuring that you're respecting people's data privacy, that you have sensitivity. Now you are now empowered to make that call. So I think there's going to be, as you scale, processes that are going to need to harden up a little bit, and processes that can be sort of beacons of your culture because of the way you engage employees around them. And I think being really specific, a great way to test your processes, whether they're tight or, you know, support your culture, is how you interact with the marketplace and customers. I think that however large the company, the values around caring about customers, supporting, servicing customers, being there for your customers, whatever version of that truth is in your company, can always be sort of a place where you can support and reinforce and recognize and promote and model behavior that says, you know, be innovative around our customers. I don't care if we're a billion-dollar company. And I work with one company that rewards their employees if they come back with ideas, even if the idea doesn't go into the pipeline that a customer might have shared with them. So bringing back that insight and trying to force innovation back in the company is something that we don't want to regulate. We really want to have stay vibrant. So I think you have to have some distinction between where you have to be a little more disciplined and where you want to continue to have your culture be as wide open as you have built it, and be explicit about it and make sure folks understand. But I think the reality is that you, just like we talked about being very intentional about putting culture in when you start, you've got to be intentional about how you scale and what's changing, and really think about, because when I started my company, in the 90s, everyone, in the beginning, we had 10 people. Everyone was involved in every decision we made. When we had 300 people, 18 months later, everyone didn't get a vote. So we had to figure out specifically, intentionally, as we scaled, how are these rules going to change, and how do we offset the impact of the culture?
Yeah, very well said. There's a few things I want to draw out there because they could get lost in what is a very, very complex set of challenges that people have. So I'll start with the reality that Ashley deals with, which is, you heard very clearly from Dharmesh yesterday saying that they made a choice at the IPO to make everybody an insider. That was a conscious choice. And then you hear Andrew saying, but we've made a conscious choice to disclose financials. And then we hear you, Kirk, saying, but you can't just disclose financials as a public company. And so if you come full circle again, we have to figure out, well, so what can we do that creates a culture that enables and empowers people? And the observation in the great companies is somewhere somebody defines, and obviously it's culture code as people now talk about it, the basis for what are good decisions and indeed what people can and can't do. And interestingly enough, it starts right at hiring. Do you encourage people who are totally different to join your organization or not? Maybe the answer is yes, so long as they have the same values. But you also want them to self-select out because you've been clear about that. And that holds everybody in the same vein in terms of the basis on which they're operating, no matter what their role is, et cetera. The other thing that's fascinating is, and I want to put this up, for the audience to all get involved in, is very few people find it easy to define their number one value. So for the audience, just throw this in the chat. What is your number one cultural value? And don't feel afraid to put something out there that might not be recognized. Just pop it out there. And as I talk to this group, I'm going to let any of you just jump in. What is one of your number one values? And for example, is it customers first? or is it team first? That's one that gets people into all sorts of difficulty. Or do you want to take it in a completely different direction? Is there something else you want to bring up?
Well, I was thinking just a little bit about how we were talking about risk and talking about who are insiders and who aren't. And one of the things that I first learned when I joined HubSpot almost 3.5 years ago is like, use good judgment. And I was like, use good judgment. I can do that. I'm an adult. I can absolutely figure out how to use good judgment and kind of follow my gut. And it's something that was so simple to me. And I was like, so there's no like long employee handbook that I need to read. There's no like pages and pages of compliance. And for me, that gave me the autonomy to take control of not only like my values and what I felt so deeply connected me to HubSpot, but I felt like I was treated like an adult. And I was like, okay, I can do this in a way that feels authentic to me, with values that I know are structurally kind of put in place here at HubSpot that help guide my day to day. So I just found that really a great way to kind of have it all bleed into our values overall.
Andrew or Kirk, do you mind if I bring in something from Sim, from the audience to just bring this discussion forward too? Great. So I loved listening to what you just said, Ashley, which was personal, which was great. So you felt empowered by that. I think it's a really great example. But then, of course, if you have to figure this out bottoms up or top down, what is the best way to balance that? And what do you guys think in that regard?
Well, I'll just jump in here, and many have heard me say this because it was taught to me by one of my great mentors, Russ Campanello, who is a tremendous leader of people at iRobot. He and I worked together several times. And one thing he taught me was no posters. So, you talked about the HP Way poster, Michael. I mean, I think that the road is littered with aspirational posters, particularly when the behavior does not recognize any of them, right? And let me tell you, your team will figure that out right away, right? Yeah. Oh, we care about the customers, but look, we don't have a customer success organization that's 24/7. I mean, they will find you out. So I think it's something that is, in my opinion, the power of behavior cannot be overstated. And I'm looking at some of these fantastic, Russ, I see Jenny, Russ is fantastic. I want to go back to Ashley's point, I think, and what Ashley's role is and what she does so well at HubSpot, man. This value of, those of us who care about equity and inclusion as a, underlying and important piece, maybe the only important piece of respect for employees and teams. I mean, for me, respect is a hugely important value, and respect for customers, respect for each other, even if we don't agree, respect for our employees can guide a lot of behavior. And I will tell you that I sit on a board where we are, talking about diversity and inclusion constantly, and the senior team is all white men, which doesn't make them bad people. Let me be clear. But that story does not support the words that we're talking about. On the other hand, I sit on a board where we care about diversity and inclusion and respect. And we just announced that our executive compensation was going to include, as a key component, our ability to reach our ESG goals, to include a specific metric on DEI. So if you think about the difference there, and you ask yourself as a new employee evaluating these cultures, which one of these is committed to this respect and engagement and in this sort of diversity and inclusion of all people, and which one isn't? I think it's an important underlying lesson, your actions, your behaviors are the key.
And I know, Ashley, you have had to figure this out too. And in fact, I'll introduce not just diversity and inclusion, but equity. And somebody raised this yesterday in the DEI conversation, which is, it's all very well to have great D&I policy, but if you're not actually showing equity for your existing team, it's not going to play out. So tell us a little bit about how you've incorporated this into the culture at HubSpot and how you deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I'm one of the managers on the diversity and inclusion team. And so for us, like our 3 tenets we talk about mostly are diversity, inclusion, and belonging, but equity is really the umbrella that encapsulates all of those terms. So we can't think about diversity, inclusion, and belonging without infusing equity into our systems and processes. We know that there are just too many broken systems that are enabling us to, a lot of people are feeling like there are equal opportunities for so many, but we can't get there if there's no equity involved. And so I think a lot of what we do is trying to build on the celebration, the amplification, and the support of marginalized communities within our HubSpot community, not just internally, but with our customers and our partners as well. And really trying to infuse that into our day-to-day. So whether it's conversations on a team level in a department, or it's through our employee resource groups, we try to, that becomes our culture, right? That is part of our day-to-day. So we celebrate the big stuff, and we really lean into that. But I think what really makes us different is that we know when we haven't gotten something right, and we're able to say, you know what, like we just didn't get it right there. So here's what we're doing, and here's how we're moving forward. And so we did that just so incredibly well, and I feel so proud to have been a part of a lot of that during last year and last June specifically, just with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how our company really, for the first time, had to take a look in the mirror and say, like, what are we doing to really create a company that is going to make our grandchildren proud? What are the systems? What are the processes? And that for us was a look, introspection. And we really sat together and we really made some commitments to our organization. It wasn't about, shouting it from the rooftops. It was about what we can do to walk the walk. And it's just been an incredible transformation from the inside. Yeah.
What I love, again, listening to you, you're also referring to things that I think you can see it coming up in the chat. Like Joe Wykes is saying, it's the say-do ratio. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And honestly, that is so true. And few companies understand that. Walk the talk is another way of thinking about it. But all of these things show up best when people get the chance to do it authentically. So, Andrew, I know that you're going to be unable to read this at the pace that I'm going to put it up on screen. But bottom line is, when do you start to get intentional about this kind of culture that we're all talking about? And, when you move from feeling it's like just understood to really addressing it. And while you think about the answer to this, I'll give you one little story that a Boston company called Salsify should be very proud of. It's actually one of my larger investments now, about 100 million in ARR in the middle of this year. But the very first day that they got me involved, it was not to put money in. In fact, they wouldn't let me. It was to run a culture session for them. And there were only 4 of them, and you know them all, Andrew. So you know full well where this can start, which is day 0. So tell us what you think is a good answer to Jacqueline's question here.
I mean, she talks about how to make it authentic. I think, number one, you have to talk about it and own it. I think it's okay to acknowledge it's a little cheesy, but you have to talk about why we care about culture. I think this conversation itself starts it. You should talk to your team about why this matters, right? Like at 10 people, you're right. Like everybody effuses what's happening because you're all, used to be physically in the same room. You have lunch together, you see those things, and then you start increasing the team size. It's much harder. So I think you need to be declarative about why we need to shape it. We're going through that right now. Over the last, quarter, we've been codifying and defining part of it, but it's not decreed, right? Like it is like at 10 people, you might, even though I wouldn't like to do it, you could say like, hey, this is what we're going to do, right? I think as you get to 30, 40, 50 people, who cares what I think, right? Frankly, right? Like I can't say, have fun team. It's just not going to work, right? And so, for us, values are really built up across a number of clinics we did on small teams. We rolled them up. We discussed them. We talked about what actually worked and what didn't and all of those things. And then we have a starting point to have the conversation. And then you have to revisit it on a regular basis. I think you have to take the taboo away that you can't talk about this stuff, because I think you need to. And by the act of talking about it, you talk about inviting the team to help cultivate it. I think earlier in the chat, someone used the word tending a garden. And I actually talk about something similar. I talk about stoking a fire, right? I think, one thing we can do as founders and stuff, we can first talk about the values and develop them with the team, but you have to stamp out things immediately if they actually are wrong, right? There's nothing worse than a poisonous individual or actions that do that. And so that's the thing you have to curb immediately. And that's the actions that you're talking about. And then second of which is then for us, because I believe strongly in this kind of team-oriented culture, you can stoke the fire, you can tend the garden, you can water the plants, you can feed the culture when you see things actually happening. You do that publicly by celebrating it, but you can also help people. You can develop leaders from behind the scenes. You can lead from behind. You can help them rally the troops. You can teach them to write emails. You can teach them to like talk about why this is going to be a good event for others or not. You can teach empathy to learn to listen to each other along the way. And I think those are ways that you can do it from behind that does feel authentic, that is coming from the intention of the team. And I think that's a big part of it, which is the authenticity comes because it is always moving. Culture is not static. It's an evolution of the team and where it moves. And you have to acknowledge that in a way to support that structure. And if you do that, I think it has a much better chance of being authentic, right? It's not a top-down decree. It's not a random thing that I or anybody on this call actually just said. It's actually what people really want to live and breathe and have fun and enjoy with.
That's great. Really great. And by the way, I know you are like this, but people who reward failure and recognize that it's actually an example of trying hard enough is a good example that I see in startups that make a real difference. Because guess what? If you don't reward that failure, you're never going to get people to take a shot in this unanswered space that you're in when you get into a breakthrough. And you need that. You need people to be willing to do that and take that risk. Well, this is fascinating. And when you look in the chat, you'll see lots of people came up with great values, including one that you mentioned, Kirk, which is respect. And then there are others that I know you've mentioned, Ashley, empathy, etc., humility, etc. What I'd love to do now is give everybody a chance to chat about these in our breakout rooms. And sorry, not our breakout rooms, at our roundtables, which will be smaller groups.